Hi, I'm Chromium. To start off, at the time of making this portfolio, I was not in school anymore. I originally wanted to find a class to make a professional animation portfolio, but I had zero experience in animation. So I needed to find lessons on how to animate, but I didn't even have any proper knowledge of anatomy or drawing in general. So one thing led to another, and in summer 2023, I joined a certain well-known workshop that was specifically made for college applications. It wasn't actually ideal for me, but it felt like the closest thing to learning what I needed to learn, and quickly. By the end of it, I kind of half-heartedly decided to apply for Sheridan and Seneca. I reasoned that whether I got in or not, it was a good way to keep me motivated and make something that I could use for an actual portfolio someday. How I was gonna afford going back to college was a thought for another day. I don't want to drag on about my experience here though, so I'm going to put my full experience in another video. As a disclaimer, I don't really consider myself as an artist in the traditional sense. I did study art and architecture, but I didn't grow up learning traditional drawing and painting. Therefore, my experiences and advice may not be helpful or relevant to you. They are merely personal takes and suggestions. Do what works for you. As of the time of this recording, I am still waitlisted, but by June I already decided to go to Seneca instead. If by pure chance I get accepted sometime after that, I'll have to reconsider if Sheridan is really worth it for me. I'm not here to get a degree, I just want a body of work I can use for potential jobs. Seneca might not be the top animation school in Canada, but as long as it can teach me something, I'll make do. While I'm a bit disappointed I didn't get accepted, the results are within my predictions. I at least knew that I would have either barely passed or barely failed, so being on waitlist sounds about right. The downside was that I just barely got onto the waitlist, so it's pretty much the same as a rejection, now with added anxiety. So now let's talk about the individual sections. I am shocked that I got 10 out of 10 on this. Like, are you kidding me? The one thing that I had to grind for months on and was never satisfied with is the one thing that Sheridan thought I was great at. Before taking that summer course, I had never done life drawings before and really struggled to get it right for months. By the end of it, I gave up in frustration. I would have been happy with an 8 out of 10. In general, for the short poses and long poses, I choose one of each that was accepted by my teacher and one that I personally liked. The basics of figure drawings is to have a vague image. For short poses, the key is showing a strong line of action and using long strokes as an implication of the pose. This 1-minute gesture is good because we can see a line that goes from the back down to the arm in a singular stroke. Personally, I don't really like it simply because it looked ugly, but it was the only one I had with a very obvious line of action. Long poses tend to have more detail and form. Drawing through the objects adds more form and shows your ability to see in 3D rather than drawing things flat. On the other hand, you don't want to add too many lines around the curvature of the body or arms, but rather one that clearly indicates the form and bumps on the surface. Feet is important to draw for gestures and is a good way to ground the figure, so it's not just floating in space. I think both of these drawings are good because of the bend of the foot. You can see the tension and weight. Another thing is line weight. It's good to keep in mind how things closer to you are darker than the things that are farther away. By making the lines lighter in the back, it makes, for example, the leg recede into the background and adds depth to the overall figure. Typically, to do life drawings, you need to reserve a chunk of your time to draw a bunch of figures, and by the end of the session, you select your best ones. For me, I could only draw for about 2 or 3 hours before I gave up for the day. Even the summer class life drawings were typically 3 hours long. Because these are timed drawings, you can't really just sit down for one session and expect the best thing to come out. There's an RNG aspect to it, and a skill you continue to build in moderation. I feel obligated to say this, but if you're looking for life drawing sessions in Toronto, I recommend going to the open life drawing sessions at Artist 25 on Dundas and Brock Avenue, or Animation Portfolio Workshop at St. Michael's United Church. I went to a few sessions at Artist 25, which were really helpful despite its small studio space, whereas APW has a much larger studio to work in and has been recommended by my peers. Hand drawings use the same principles as the figure drawings. It's about drawing through the object and showing form. Breaking down the fingers into cylinders or curved rectangles might help. Since I did the Seneca portfolio, I just used the same hand drawing for both. Seneca requires you to draw your non-dominant hand, which would be my left hand, in 2 different poses, and Sheridan requires you to draw an action of throwing an object. It's important to make sure both hands have good silhouette and are distinctive enough on their own. I've seen people say that one hand should show the back of the hand with the knuckles and the other should show the palm of the hand. I wouldn't say mine had the back of the hand though. Originally the object was going to be a coin, but a coin appeared too flat, so I chose the battery because of its simple cylindrical shape. Personally, I would have expected marks off because there wasn't a clear form for the palm of the hand, and the thumb kind of hides in the silhouette of the hand, but I think by darkening around the thumb, it appears in front of the other fingers. I have heard that it's okay if the drawings are sketchy, as long as it shows the correct forms. Hand drawings in general seem to be something that I was pretty good at already, despite not being able to utilize that skill in my personal work, so I wasn't too worried about this section. Initially I thought this section would be easy because I've done it before, but hey, it turned out way harder than I thought. Having to make sure everything is exactly aligned in the correct position and perspective was a pain. I think the flaw of this drawing is how confusing the body is, and having it lean to one side makes it difficult to see it from the side view. I had a lot of lines that are slanted, so it makes it difficult to rotate it on a slanted axis. The body, the paintbrush, the right ear, the bottom of the dress, and the left leg are all rotated on a slant. The line in the center doesn't even really indicate the rotation of the character because the body is shifted from the center line already. The hair is also foreshortened in the side view, which makes it overall complicated to see in a 3D space. Other than that, I would say my lines are a bit sketchy, but I don't think that really matters. I went through a few iterations of the character already and decided on the painter bunny because it's simple and unique enough. And while my technical ability to rotate the character wasn't great, I'm still happy with the character design itself. I think she's cute, that's all I'm saying. I think as a general tip, you should be able to draw inside the character and you should start with simple shapes. My early drafts appeared very stiff. It's good for the pose to have a good line of action, as well as be asymmetrical. I've seen other character rotations that are very symmetrical but still work, so it might be just how well your technical drawings are and how well the basic shapes form your character. I think this mark is fair. Personally, I wasn't all too happy with the results since I still feel like my animations aren't as smooth as others. Originally, the walkie-talkie would walk, but I was told that it looked a little janky and a hop would be better. Since I only changed some of the frames, I still think it's a bit janky. My biggest problem was actually the framing. I think the perspective is kind of off because it's like a slanted view where the walkie-talkie comes from a distance and walks along a path diagonal of it, and because of that I was running out of space because it couldn't fall that far or else it would just go off screen. On the other hand, I've seen people use a scenario where the walkie-talkie just bounces off screen, so I don't really know which one is better. The one thing I do like is my concept. It's simple enough to make in a short period of time, but having it react to a pin on the ground and jump in pain is kind of interesting. It also allows me to exaggerate the jump and have the parts from the walkie-talkie leap out before it falls pathetically to the floor. In total, I used about 30 frames. This one's just sad. I knew that storyboard was the most important section in the portfolio, but pretty sure this alone was what failed me. I already knew that my story wasn't the greatest, and yeah, maybe if I changed the story I would have done better, but I really couldn't think of anything for the prompt. Opportunities don't just happen, you create them. The story is basically the fox and the dog want to go to the playground, but soon realize the playground is under construction. The dog is sad and gives up, but the fox sees the trash on the side and uses the trash to make their own playground. I thought it was better to be simple, but I was told it was too simple. I think Sheridan prefers to have surprise or a plot twist at the end of the story, which this story doesn't really have that impact, which is probably why the stories that negatively impact the character tend to do better, but that's just a guess. Like an art teacher would say, it all depends on your own abilities, it's up to you, or something like that. Anyway, the biggest problem I think I had was how cluttered my frames were. I had too many things I wanted to point at and couldn't find a good way to get everything in frame without blocking things. For example, the first frame has the fox and the dog running towards something, and in the background is a sign with a picture of a playground. Typically, you don't want to use signs or writing in your storyboard because it shows you can't tell a story with imagery alone. And I knew that, yet I still couldn't find a way to show that they're heading towards a playground. In retrospect, maybe I should have simplified it further to going to the swings, so they pass by the sandbox or basketball court or something. The second frame was even harder because I wanted to point at the shocked expressions of the characters, the construction of the playground preventing them from going forward, and the trash on the side. Also again, I resorted to using a sign. I think the third frame was fine, maybe the perspective of the fourth frame might be off. But I don't know, I think I drew the fox pretty on model and I like the poses and expressions. Maybe in the first frame the nose could be a little longer. In any case, I'll take the L on this one. Okay, this one is probably my biggest disappointment. These are the best layouts I've ever made, mostly because they're the only layouts I've ever made. I had the most confidence on this one, but I guess it ended up all being for naught. I personally like my exterior layout because of how far-reaching it goes and the gradual recession of the landscapes, whereas the concept of my interior layout is the most interesting, mostly because I think the teddy bear cult idea is both cool and cute and could totally make for a neat indie horror game. The most noticeable problem I realized later on was that I didn't exaggerate the line quality enough. I should have used a much thicker line for the objects in the front and really emphasized the importance of certain elements. As for further complaints, it's similar to my other ones. It's too complicated. I was told to put more details in it, but I feel like that kind of made the scene more cluttered with too many things to focus on. The background of the interior layout is confusing because the corner of the wall is not where the center line is, and this wall sticks out. I don't even think some of the lines match up. The table here lines up with a column, meaning there's space between the table and the wall. I also had difficulties putting the bear on the ground because my perspective made the floor appear slanted towards you. The interior layout generally had a lot of perspective problems, and being that the perspective was so close, it lacked depth. The sizing was probably confusing. I also adjusted the perspective midway, so the vantage line ended up being right in the middle of the page, which is kind of a boring angle. This is one of those times where you should restart from scratch and redo it, but like most things in my life, I was too lazy. The exterior is a bit confusing because there's a lower level to what we're looking at, and the lower pathway looks like it's rising up to our level. I still like it conceptually though. It's also kind of a waste of this tree since it's blocked by the rocks anyway. And lastly, I guess I didn't expect to get high marks on this one. If it wasn't obvious already, I don't draw regular cartoon art, I draw anime, and not just an anime-inspired art style. This is just straight up anime. Initially, I had plans to make new illustrations in a cartoony art style, but over time I ended up not having the time or energy to make any new art. So yeah, I really started digging through all the old art I've made and plunked it into my personal work, which explains why I have a whole section that's just anime. I had a demo reel of animations I made for fun, but again, most of it is anime characters. Also, I'm kind of sad that I forgot to include this animation. I don't think it would have changed my mark, but I still could have slipped it into the reel, like all the other anime stuff I've slipped in. Other than that, I would say it lacks variety. I didn't have any 3D art, no full comics or storyboards, a lack of layouts or colored works. A lot of it is just character art. While I did have an anime storyboard and a manga hidden in the sketchbook section, it still is only one section and it's not strong enough to count as its own piece. Since I didn't get accepted, most of my tips are just criticisms of my own art and what I could have done better. Overall, my portfolio isn't that bad, and I'm still pretty proud of the work I've managed to produce, given that I wouldn't have made any of these regularly. The class I took wasn't particularly helpful, but it did provide me the time and motivation to commit to figure drawings, as well as providing me with social activities. The important part for me, however, is learning the skills. And let's be real, I'm not going to be the next Disney animator. If anything, I'm going to be animating the next One Piece. And with all of that, we come to the end of the video. Thank you for sticking to the end, and I hope this video helps you in some way. As mentioned before, I'm predominantly an anime illustrator, so if you like my art, you can check out my socials at Chromium or support my merch shop, Crow Creates. As for my YouTube channel, this isn't a video I would usually make, but hey, if you like discussing weeb things or geek things, I've got you covered. I do plan on doing more animated stories or simple animations as well, so subscribe if that's your thing. Goodbye and good luck.